We've got a verdict. Ari Melber.
We are looking at count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, guilty. Count 5, guilty. Those are the first 5 counts coming out of this jury, finding Donald J. Trump guilty on the first 5 felony counts. Reading the rest as we are getting it from our court reporters.
Starting with count 6.
Count 6, guilty. Count 7, guilty. Count 8, guilty. And you'll see on the screen we're tracking ahead. Count 9, guilty. Count 10, guilty. Count 11, guilty. Count 12, guilty. Count 13, guilty. Count 14, guilty. Count 16, guilty. Count 17, guilty. Count 18, guilty. Count 19, guilty. Count 20, guilty. Count 21, guilty. Count 22, guilty. Count 23, guilty. Count 24, guilty. Count 25, guilty. Count 26, guilty. Count 27, we're seeing that on the screen, guilty. Count 28, guilty. Those are the first 28 felony counts here as read by the jury. Count 29, guilty. Count 30, guilty. Count 31, guilty. Count 32, guilty. Count 33 and 34, guilty. That is Donald J. Trump, defendant in New York versus Donald Trump, found guilty on all 34 felony counts. That is the verdict here in this case.
Rachel?
Listen, it's a unanimous jury verdict, unanimous on all counts. This is a definitive and, this is an irreducible verdict. He can appeal. I'm sure he will appeal. But this is everything that the prosecution asked for from a jury that, by all accounts, took this thing very, very seriously. We counted the deliberation hours down here. The test here for us as a country is not about what happens on appeal and is not about what happens in sentencing. The test for us now as a country is whether or not this former president and his allies will have succeeded in trying to undermine the rule of law so that people reject this as a legitimate function of the rule of law in our country. They have tried to delegitimize this judge. They have tried to delegitimize this court. They have tried to delegitimize these proceedings. They've even tried to delegitimize the laws that he was charged under. Those efforts are the test that we now have as a country. The people involved in bringing this case have been threatened and intimidated and had everything brought to bear on against them in a way that was designed to delegitimize this process in the eyes of the American people. It is now in the hands of the American people to decide if we will accept those efforts or whether we will stand by the rule of law and recognize this as a fair proceeding.
A wise woman said a few nights ago, 2 Mondays ago, that the rule of law is mortal. It needs to be protected. It isn't an abstract thing. And today, the people have names that we've all come to know. They're named Joshua Steinglass. They're named Alvin Bragg. They're named Susan Hoffinger.
Yeah. And there are other cases that are pending against Donald Trump as a criminal defendant. The difference is that we now know as a country what it is to put a former president on trial and to see that trial to fruition. That is something that was hypothetical before we ever had this guy as a former president. But now we have lived through it, and we know that the court process can work. A defendant who is a former president can be tried as a normal defendant. Again, the appeals process will go on. The sentencing process will go on, and those will all be pressure points. But the legal system in this country treats any former president as any citizen. We've seen that today, and this jury deserves to be thanked for their efforts and to be protected from the kinds of attacks and intimidation and recrimination that the president and his allies have tried to bring down on this process.
Let me just tell folks what's happened. What Ari said or Andrew said would happen has happened. Judge Merchan went juror to juror to juror. They all concurred with the verdict that Donald Trump is guilty on all 34 criminal counts, 34 felonies. And they have been thanked for their service, Ari.
Yeah, what you just reported and what Rachel was reminding us is actually existing in a microcosm within the trial because the jury is being polled, a jury of the peers of the defendant, as is his right. So that's legally something where the defense counsel is asked, do you want to make sure? They almost always, virtually always say yes. And so we're told, and we're looking at our notes here, pardon me for looking down, but our reporters are seeing The defendant, Donald Trump, is looking at the jury, is watching them as they are individually polled. But this is, as Rachel reminded us, someone who has been held in contempt for what he has said and done against other people and witnesses in the system. So I would call that a fairly intense moment, but good for the jury and good for the system to go right through it. Our reporter's also telling us that while Trump has rarely shown emotion or changed his, quote, demeanor throughout the trial right now, he's only looking down. Eric Trump reportedly looking upset. And that's the scene in the room as they go through it.
Sure. When you say poll the jury, what you mean is individually, jurors by number will be asked, is this your verdict? And then they each have to answer orally. They have to say out loud, yes.
Yes, and that's the transparency.
It's got to be a scary moment for those individual jurors.
Right, as they're being stared down, but it's a transparency in our system. You said something so important. The system worked. We discussed earlier when we were awaiting this that it works not because of the result, but because of the process. And that if it were an acquittal, we would be discussing that the system went forward. This is that system, and the judge and the bailiffs and others are there to protect the people and protect them in a physical sense as needed. But what we are hearing is that this jury heard the evidence, asked these questions. We know some of what was on their minds. We haven't heard from them other than the verdict, and now are confirming that this is their unanimous verdict. And so it's a matter of transparency that everyone sees each of them confirm what was officialized today, that Donald Trump is guilty, that all 12 jurors unanimously reached that decision through their reasoning with each other on all 34 counts.
Andrew.
Just to Rachel's point, there is something in every trial when the jury is polled that is sort of magical and fundamental to this country, where the jurors, each one stands up and counts as a citizen. And these are people who have everyday lives. They didn't ask to be here. And that moment where the country this is what the country stands for. This is what the rule of law means. And jurors take it so seriously. And yes, it can be scary because of it, but you know what? They did their job. And I think that this is a testament to our joining so many other democracies in the international community who have managed to hold political leaders to account. And we have shown that we can do that as well in a fair process where the defendant got extremely good counsel, had an incredibly fair process from this judge, in spite of his attacking the witnesses, the judge's family, the jurors. Everybody did their job. And finally, on a small bore, Alvin Bragg both personally was attacked. He was vilified for saying no to this case when he first took office, and people said, that how could he do that? And he said, after he said it wasn't ready. And this is a real vindication for him that he said, I'm going to bring it when it is ready and if it is ready. And then he brought it. And it's a real testament that he said, yes, now I think this case could be brought. And he did. And I think everyone understood from the moment David Pecker took that stand. I think a lot of people, including myself, reevaluated this case and said, you know what, I understand this is not just hush money. This was about fundamentally changing the 2016 election. That was the goal here. And clearly the jurors believed that.
Sue.
I'm also just now thinking about the E. Jean Carroll case when the judge at the end told the jurors that jury was anonymized, and he said, forget you were here, in substance. And now today the judge has actually said that they can discuss the case if they like. The choice is theirs, but they no longer are barred from discussing it. And he's actually also asked to meet with them to discuss their work, not to discuss the case, but to discuss their work. So we don't know what time these jurors are going to get out of the building tonight, but he's going to sit down with them. And then after that, I imagine they're going to hear from pretty much every reporter that has been covering this. Hundreds of reporters will descend on them to try and get them to talk about the inner workings of that jury room.
Is Vaughn Hilliard still with us? Vaughn, just tell me
Nicole, I think
what's going on down there?
Yeah, I think part of this is what is going to take place from here on out. We're 5 months from the November election, and we talked about what a guilty verdict could mean to the stakes of this election. Donald Trump is repeatedly called November 5th the most important day in American history. That is Election Day coming up. And for him, this only increases the stakes. Number one, these are state charges here. we do not know what his sentence will be. If it'll just be fine, probation, or whether he will be facing jail time. That is going to be the determination of Judge Merchan. And when you look at the election, of course, the expectation is that if he were to win the White House, that prison sentence, if he were to get one, would be suspended or whatever the punishment is here. But for Donald Trump, he has already sent out a fundraising video in the last 24 hours to his supporters that they were going to be throwing him in jail here in New York. And so for him, he has every intention of using this to his a political advantage to the extent he can. And I think the first statement to come from any of his family members since this verdict was issued, I think, is an example of that. That would be Don Jr., who was not here at the courthouse today. He was here yesterday. Eric Trump was inside the courtroom, currently still is. And I just want to read for you Don Jr.'s tweet, if I could. Quote, guilty on all counts. The Democrats have succeeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world expletive. November 5 is our last chance to save it. I read that last line. November 5 is our last chance to save it, because Donald Trump himself on the campaign trail has repeatedly suggested that the end of America is near if they does not take back the White House. From our team of reporters and they say Donald Trump, the defendant, has been seated inside of that courtroom, stoic, stone-faced. He looked at each of the jurors as they walked out, all 12 of those New Yorkers, as they walked out of the courtroom. This is somebody who is still seated in a straightforward position, understanding the political stakes now that he has been found guilty of these 34 felony counts here in New York. Donald Trump is now walking to the microphone. He's not going to be coming to Trump Tower, but I'll step out of the way for him right now.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
That was something to behold, because when Trump and Todd Blanche and their entourage first came into the courtroom today at about 4:15 when they were summoned by Judge Merchan, they were in high spirits. Trump and Blanche shoulder to shoulder, whispering conspiratorially like they had some extensive inside joke between them that they couldn't wait to stop talking about. And then you have the verdict itself, read by the foreperson who, as you know, is chosen by New York law, not by his peers. When he gave the verdict, he was asked, what say you on count 1, count 2, count 3, all the way through 34? And Nicole, holding a hand mic like he was at a grade school talent show, the man said in a very clear voice, looking directly at Judge Merchan, for each of those 34 counts, guilty. I will tell you, when I heard him say count 1 was guilty and count 2 was guilty, I was pretty sure they would have a straight run. And the reason is because some of those early counts correspond to checks and to payments that weren't made by Donald Trump in his personal capacity, but by the trust. those were ones on which the Trump folks thought they might have a chance because they could distance their client from what was done by the trust. But the minute I heard him say that, I could also see in some of the other jurors' shoulders like a lightening of the load. There weren't any smiles. They did not seem to particularly relish the moment, but they seemed lighter by the fact that this was over. This was a jury, as Lawrence said, that took this extremely seriously, was utterly attentive. The very fact of the 4 questions that they posed to Judge Merchan in terms of the testimony that they wanted read back to them shows you how intently they were listening to the closing arguments that exhausted even the inexhaustible press corps. I can tell you, I have more of an appetite for minutia about this case than just about anyone I know. And even I was saying to myself, oh my God, Josh Steinglass, wrap it up here. And yet the jurors never flagged, right?
Yeah.
And they were just with him all the way. They took their job intensely seriously. And of course, when they were done rendering their verdict, each and every one of them had to say that they agreed to it because Blanche insisted that they be polled. And again, in a clear voice for each and every one of them, they either said yes to the question, is this your verdict, or yes, it is. And with that, Merchan, you could see him, he put his head in his hand for a second, as if almost weighing the gravity of what had just happened in his courtroom. And yet, in that same gentle but stern demeanor that we have seen throughout the entirety of the trial, first people that he directed his attention to were the jury, to thank them for their service and for their attention and engagement and investment in the case. And in an overture to who they were deciding this case against, he did nod to the importance and the gravity of the case, noting he never said you were called upon to decide a case against the person who used to be the leader of the free world. But it was clear that what he was saying to them was, you took your time, you paid attention, you understood what was at stake here, and you didn't rush to a judgment. Rather, you were thinking thoroughly about each and every bit of evidence that was presented to you. And then he turned to the alternate jurors and similarly thanked them. And I want to flag here for you, Nicole, and for Rachel and others, we never had to call upon an alternate juror here. Given the length of this trial, that in and of itself is rare. And so he turned his attention to them and saying, like, look, in many of my trials, I have had to call upon alternate jurors to fill in. I never needed that from you, but nonetheless, you were attentive. You were here throughout. Thank you. And it was only then that he turned his attention to the tasks that remained, whether there were any motions from Todd Blanche, who, of course, stood up and asked for a judgment, notwithstanding the verdict, saying that this jury could not possibly convict Donald Trump unless they were relying on Michael Cohen in large part. And he made a reference to the fact that everyone knows that Michael Cohen is a perjurer. And that's the only time today we saw Merchan's temper flare in the slightest when he said, when you're referring to knowing that he is a perjurer, you're not implicating me. You're not saying that I know him to be a perjurer. Are you, Mr. Blanche? I think you misspoke. And Todd Blanche immediately backed off and said, no, Your Honor, that's not what I was saying. We then set a sentencing date, but I can tell you that while my hands were typing the details, my leg was shaking the entire time because it was tense for everybody in that room. Just like the 7 weeks of having been in there from jury selection to today's finale, I wasn't sure we were going to get to a place where we had any guilty verdict against Donald Trump, let alone all 34 counts. And that's because this jury showed some of their doubt and skepticism on their faces at times, as you would want any good jury to do, Nicole.
Lisa Rubin, I have a question for you, and I want to share something with you. Alvin Bragg has just tweeted this. Today, a jury found Donald J. Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. That's the tweet. And my question is, what was notable inside the courtroom when the verdict was read? Ari had some reporting that Eric Trump seemed upset or acted upset. Did anyone gasp? Did anyone say anything? What was the reaction that you could pick up?
Oh, yeah. So I was sitting next to Adam Klasfeld, who, as you know, has been with our colleague Lawrence O'Donnell each and every night and in the courtroom every day on one side and another reporter on the other. And I could hear gasps all around me, immediately followed by the, what you imagine the sound of the Kermit the Frog typing meme to be. That's what the courtroom sounded like. But in the aftermath of the verdict, after the jury had gone, after Donald Trump had left the courtroom, and we were still in there with the DA's office, who I should note, day in and day out, when Donald Trump leaves, the DA's office is usually still in there. What was notable to me was there was no gloating. Alvin Bragg looked straight ahead. There was no smile on his face. I didn't see anybody. They did not look like a group of people who just won a 34-count conviction against the former president of the United States, let alone the first ever criminal conviction against a president or former president. They looked like a group of people who had just had a long day at trial, and they had clearly prepared themselves for the fact that the eyes of 100+ journalists would be on them if, in fact, they got to that moment. And there was no gloating and no celebration. They were like any other lawyers leaving the Manhattan Criminal Court behind me on any ordinary day.
Can I just say also that seeing those remarks from Trump live in the hallway, obviously the circumstances are now different. He's now the first ever American president, former president, to be convicted of crimes. He's now a different type of figure in history than he was half an hour ago. And yet he walks up to the camera and he just says all of the same stuff that he's been saying all of this time. It's all of the same stuff. He's like a chatty Cathy doll. You pull the string and the words come out and they're pre-programmed. His saying that it's rigged, he was saying it was rigged before the verdict ever came in. These are all the same lines that he's been using all before the jury was picked. The whole he said that the 2020 election was rigged before he competed in the 2020 election. He said the 2016 election was rigged before he competed in that election. This is a thing that he says he's just the same person. Nothing about this is going to change him. But he and his supporters are trying to change us as a country by delegitimizing the legal system of the United States of America because it has found Donald Trump guilty, because the legal system indicted him, because he was put on trial, because he's now been found guilty. They have been using that as their excuse to try to not just upend the American legal system, but to get rid of it, to make Americans believe that it shouldn't be followed. And so the test here, yes, individual tests abound. This jury process was a test. The appellate process will be a test. The sentencing process is an adversarial process, and that itself will be a test. But the test for us as a country starts right now. Does the United States of America have a legal system that is binding on all citizens? Do we accept it? Do we protect the people who enact it? There are human beings at every step of this process who are flesh and blood and who have family members and who are susceptible to threat and injury. Do we protect them? Do we protect Fani Willis? Do we protect Tish James? Do we protect Alvin Bragg? Do we protect this judge and his family? Do we protect the jurors? Do we protect the witnesses? Do we protect Jack Smith? Do we protect Judge Cannon? Do we protect Judge Chutkan? Do we make sure that the people who are in charge of enacting this on our behalf as citizens and on Donald Trump's behalf as a citizen, do we make sure that they can do this work both without fear or favor and without threat? And we have failed on that so far. We need to step up our protection of the human beings in this process tonight in response to this verdict.
I mean, Rachel, I think we have the answer to a swath of the country, right? I mean, Trump has run against this judge. And I have to say, we don't know because he wasn't acquitted, but had he been acquitted, you can imagine, you can go back to his response to the end of the Mueller probe when Bill Barr distorted Mueller's findings. Yes. And Donald Trump didn't. He went to a more general attack of the Russia hoax, but he didn't indict the entire process because he felt it exonerated him. I think we have our answer that 30% of the country won't protect those people. Right. And I think that what we have to stare at the sun, I feel like I'm making too many Trump references here, thinking of him in the eclipse, but what we have to stare at, and it's hard, and it may do damage, is the fact that Shamos and Ruby Freeman, that's their blueprint. Yeah. That's their model. What they did to the election officials is what they've sought to do to Fani Willis. It's what they've sought to do to Jack Smith. Yes. It's what they did to Anthony Fauci. They have a playbook. And their tweets aren't just stupid burps of Trump's, insane impulses. They're orders. Don't take my word for it. Ask the Proud Boys. Ask the people that went to the Capitol on January 6th. People follow his orders. And his I'll quote him. What he just said was, this was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial. We didn't get a venue change. We're at 5% in this, he said, district, but I think he meant, I don't know what he meant. He said, I'm an innocent man. This was a Biden administration prosecution. Our country's gone to hell. We are a nation in decline. There are terrorists and people from mental institutions flooding in. We have our answer on what 30% of the country thinks.
And your vision of what he's offering you. And we are a nation in decline. We're a nation that is a disgrace. We're a nation that has no rule of law, where everything is rigged. He said this trial is rigged. This country is rigged. That's the vision that we're offering here. I mean, if the rule of law, if court orders and the judgment of juries is delegitimized in this country, what do we have left? What do you have if you don't have that? If the country is being conditioned along partisan lines to reject court orders, to reject jury verdicts, to reject the legal process as rigged, as illegitimate, as non-constitutional, what do we have when those things are no longer respected by the population? What's left? We all know the answer to this, and it's never been clearer than it is today. But the rule of law exists in this country. It came to this verdict today. And, you know, at this point, again, thank you to the jurors. Thank you to this judge. Thank you to all the court security officers and the witnesses and everybody they and their family members had to walk into the belly of the beast to do this. But this is the system working in a fair way for a citizen among us like any other. Joining us now here on set for his first interview since tonight's verdict was announced is the prosecution's primary witness from this case, Michael Cohen. He's joined here tonight by his attorney, Donya Perry. We're grateful to you both for being here.
It's good to see you all.
How are you?
I guess the word is relieved. This has been 6 years in the making. Remember, the very first time that I met with the district attorney's office, we talked about it when I was on your show after putting out Disloyal. The very first time I ever met with the district attorney's office was while I was an inmate in Otisville. They came up to see me on 3 separate occasions. So this is a 6-year process within which for accountability to finally be had.
Were you surprised by the verdict?
No, I was not. I've been on so many of the shows on here on MSNBC, and I've told you all along that the facts speak for themselves. The documents speak for themselves. I've listened to so many pundits come on the various shows, including some of the hosts talking about X, Y, and Z. They couldn't be further from the truth. And I would have conversation with my lawyer, Donya, on a regular basis. And I would say, I don't understand it. I just don't understand. How come they don't see the same things that we're seeing? I understand that, you know, it makes great headlines and so on, but the facts are the facts. And at the end of the day, the facts are what prevailed here.
You mentioned the time frame and what it's been for you. Before tonight, there was this criminal scheme that had been described by prosecutors, right? This illegal conspiracy to influence the election, payments to benefit the campaign, laundered through the Trump organization, booked falsely as funds for something else. It's been described by multiple prosecutors. But before tonight, there was exactly one person who had gotten in trouble for this scheme.
Only one.
Only one. It was you. You were not the beneficiary of the scheme, but you were the only person who had been in trouble for it. I mean, the National Enquirer got immunity, but you ended up in prison.
As did Alan Weisselberg.
Yeah. Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, told SDNY to stop the investigation after you were in prison, after you had gotten the sharp end of that stick, and to get Trump's name out of it. It's finally been 8 years down the road from these alleged crimes. I just have to ask you, I know you just said about how you feel about the verdict, but that's justice delayed. Is justice delayed, justice denied?
Clearly not in this case. 34 counts, one after the other, after the other, after the other of guilty. It's accountability. It's exactly what America needs right now. We need for accountability to be had by all those that break the law, because as we like to continuously state, no one is above the law. And today's verdict demonstrates that.
How do you think Donald Trump is feeling today in the wake of these verdicts?
Well, I can only go back to when Judge Pauley sentenced me to 36 months. You don't feel good. Sentencing is terrible. I, of course, took the plea, the 48 hours that was given to me, or they were filing the 80-page indictment that was going to include my wife. It never feels good. I did what I had to do to protect my family. This is very different. Donald didn't let it go in order to protect his family. He took it all the way. And Judge Juan Merchan, who is an absolute gentleman, to see him on that stand is to see poetry. It's to see a masterful judge who was quick with decision making. He was absolutely judicial perfection. And the jury had tremendous respect for him, as did I, which is what kept me off of all my social media. That and Danya, of course, telling me to stay off of social media. It was really out of respect for Judge Merchan in the process that I did exactly that. And the jury respects Judge Merchan, and I believe a lot of the antics that went on in the courtroom, whether it was by Blanche or by Donald himself with the eye closing, you know, the leaning back, the total disregard for the jury, I don't think he engendered any positive feelings by anyone.
Did you feel like him? I mean, some people said he was sleeping. Some people said he was resting his eyes. I don't know. There was a lot of different interpretations about what he was doing. Your interpretation of it in the room was that he was being disrespectful to the jury?
Yes, but I was also not concentrating too much on him as I was trying to keep track of Todd Blanche's meandering questioning. You know, that was very different. It would go from 2016 to 2018, 2019, 2020, and you know, trying to keep track of the dates and the events when you have that type of a meandering questioner is not an easy process.
Did you, and Danya, I'll put this to you as well, in preparing for that cross-examination from Todd Blanche, did you prepare emotionally as well as factually? It seemed like from us just watching it, being in the courtroom and from our reporters and looking at the transcript, it seemed like it was a Herculean effort to just stay calm and even keel in what seemed to be designed to provoke you and to confuse you.
A lot of our prep certainly focused on the facts, making sure, I mean, there was so much prior testimony and interviews and statements. So we wanted to be up to speed on that, refreshed.
That's not an advantage when your client has spoken a lot in public.
He has. But you know, it was important, and I emphasize this to Michael, and he handled himself remarkably well. But I wanted him to understand that his demeanor mattered and that he needed to maintain the same type of affect and composure on direct as on cross, as on redirect and on recross. And he did that. And I think I saw a connection between him and the jury. They believed him, and I think they were just with him. And so it was, yes, there was a lot of emotion involved. Painful for me as his lawyer to watch the attacks on him, the constant, I mean, 85 times he was called a liar in the summation by Todd. He's not a liar. Nobody's a liar. No one's a truth teller. He has told lies, and he admitted to it. And the jury believed him, and they returned the swift and just verdict. And so I think all the preparation was put to good use.
What Danya's describing there about the strategic necessity of you staying cool and having that same affect and everything, how hard was it?
Not hard at all. It's the media that wants to portray me as this sort of bombastic character. It's really not my nature.
We've all heard bombast from you.
But you've heard it from my Mea Culpa podcast or Political Beatdown podcast. It's a persona for it. Now, I can't go with intelligence, so I have to go with bombastic, right? Yeah, it's not necessarily my effect. Yes, I get hot-tempered. Yes, you've heard that a couple of times, you know, here and there when I was working for Mr. Trump. But that's not generally my effect. And it really wasn't hard. I will tell you, though, 51 days of solitary confinement changes anyone and everyone. When you start to learn to live in your own head, which is a dangerous place for anyone, it's very easy to then turn around and say, I just need to pull back on myself. I need to pull back on getting angry at the nonsense of Todd Blanche. And it was not as difficult as I thought. Staying focused with his questioning, that was more difficult. The anxiety and dealing with the anxiety on this was difficult as well.
What kind of anxiety?
You know, when I'm nervous. I was nervous because so much was riding on the result of this. And I wanted to ensure that my testimony was perfect. I knew that there could be no deviation from perfection. And both Danya and I afterwards, when the whole thing was over, we sat and we spoke for a little bit about my testimony and couldn't understand some of the criticisms. Oh, 1 minute and 39 seconds. How could you possibly have two conversations? Well, you can, especially when one is not a status call. It's just an update. Hey, just want to let you know everything's taken care of. We're good. That's the conversations that take place with Donald Trump, not this long-winded, including that tape that I had recorded him, which I had done, as I had told you, for David Pecker. That was only like a minute and change. So, but that was a substantive conversation. So imagine what you could do in 1 minute and 39. And I thought Josh Steinglass did a fabulous job by putting that 1 minute 39 seconds out there. Susan Offinger is just a phenomenal. The whole team, the whole prosecutorial team were incredible. As we would go through some of the documents, she knew off the top of her head most of the numbers, most of the exhibit numbers. A very impressive group of people.
What did you make of the decision by the defense? And we're all speculating that a lot of the defense strategy was driven by Trump himself. We are speculating about that because we don't know, but it just kind of felt like it. But they made a strategic decision to try to make the verdict a referendum on you.
Yeah.
Including saying and being admonished by the judge for saying at essentially the last word to the jury, do not send anyone to prison on the word of Michael Cohen. How was that for you? What do you make of that decision?
Again, I didn't really care, nor do I really care what Todd Blanche says about me. What I care about is my wife, my daughter, my son, my parents, my close friends. That's who I care about and what they say about me. Danya, I care about what she says about me. I don't care what Todd Blanche says. It means nothing to me. I don't care what Don, Ivanka, Eric, Don Jr., it doesn't matter to me what any of them say about me. I know who I am, and I knew what I needed to do. So in this specific case, it was and I had said it was a very foolish strategy. And he's not really known as a defense attorney. I think it's only his second defense trial. Not a good strategy, and proof positive of that is the 34-count verdict.
The defense counsel we're talking about, Todd Blanche, did an interview on another cable news network this evening. I'll let you guess which one. And he said in that interview that every decision in the case, every substantive decision in the case is one that he made together with Trump.
Makes sense.
Well, I was going to ask you if you see Trump's fingerprints on some of the decisions that you're describing here.
Absolutely. The term gloat, it's a Donald Trump fourth grade playground bullying type of
have a name
tactic.
For Todd?
What's that?
Didn't you have an acronym for Todd?
I did. I was going to call him a sloat, which is the stupidest lawyer of all time. You cannot listen. You cannot listen to your client when you are trying to create a defense that is as important as this one is. The very first president of the United States, former president, to ever be charged with a crime, let alone convicted now on 34 counts. It was definitively the stupidest lawyer of all time. Worse than some of the other ones that he has, in his orbit. It just made no sense at all. And any good lawyer, if he would have tried to get a hold of Danya, she never would have listened to his desire for retribution or his desire to control how the case would proceed. That's not how you run a good defense. I would never have allowed it if I was still with him.
Let me ask you about an element of the defense that was mounted, which I think I found puzzling just as an observer, and it was about the Access Hollywood tape. The defense argued that there was no new urgency from Trump to kill the Stormy Daniels story after the Access Hollywood tape because the Access Hollywood tape was no big deal. that it didn't have a big impact on the campaign, that it didn't change anybody's mindset about the relative potential damage that could be done by another sex scandal, particularly a sex scandal like this. And the reason that was, I think, puzzling to a lot of us watching it is because we were alive then, and it seemed like the Access Hollywood tape was a very big deal then, and it would have rationally had an impact in terms of the way they were thinking about the potential damage of one of these stories. You were very close to Donald Trump at the time. You were involved in the response to the Access Hollywood tape. How does that comport with your lived experience?
Completely contrary to the reality. I was in London at the time visiting my daughter, who was studying at Queen Mary University for the semester. It was her 21st birthday, not to mention several days thereafter was my anniversary. So we were there celebrating as a family when this thing happened. I spent most of the vacation outside of the restaurants on the telephone with people like Hope Hicks and others trying to do damage control. And that was demonstrated, again, by the evidence, whether it was text messages or corroborating testimony. That's what I had continuously said when I was on like Nicole's show or Joy's show or any of the MSNBC shows. This is a case that is going to come down to the documentary evidence and the testimony of others. And what ultimately was demonstrated was the fact that all of the testimony by the other witnesses that I had involvement with corroborated what I'd been saying for 6 years. And all of the evidence, the documentary evidence, emails, text messages, documents themselves, again, corroborated what I've been saying for 6 years.
This case was, I think, not derided, but downplayed by a lot of people when it became clear that it was one of 4 criminal indictments in 4 different jurisdictions for Trump. This was seen as, I think, the lightweight case.
Yeah.
There's also been, a lot of discussion even in the media. Do we call this the hush money case? Is this an election interference case? How should we shorthand this? Do you think that this case was substantively important, especially, compared with the classified documents case and the January 6th case and the other ones that are out there pending that may never come to trial? Is this one substantively important on its own?
So the answer is yes, it is. But I myself, on various different shows, have said, why are we looking at these cases like this is the Kentucky Derby, that we're handicapping the 4 cases?
Yeah.
If, in fact, this was a handicap, it would be the 4th most obscene case that Donald is being charged with. Obviously, this case does not hold equal weight to the theft of nuclear secrets, the Mar-a-Lago document case, or the insurrection, the January 6th insurrection. It just doesn't. Or even the attempt to overturn a free and fair election. Nevertheless, this is an important case. It is a legitimate case. And while I would have liked Alvin Bragg to have brought it a year earlier, because that would have been good for me, right? I would have been a year earlier finished with this. It's an important case. It's a relevant case. It is an illegal act that any one of us would have already been prosecuted for. And again, since no one is above the law, Donald needed to be held accountable, just like any of us, just like I was held accountable. The only difference, I took responsibility.
In terms of, I will say, my colleagues here, I'm being very uncool and not letting you guys in here. I've got another question I'm going to ask you, but then I will let you talk to Michael as well. A lot of the reason that I think this is being greeted the way that it is across the country, 3-inch headlines in every newspaper in the country. It's not necessarily because everybody is totally engaged with the substance of the falsifying the business record to occlude the commission of another crime, which is the actual details of this is not what's driving it. What's driving it is A, that he's the first president ever convicted of a crime, and B, what's he going to do? People are very worried about what Trump may demand or expect his supporters to do in response to this, the sort of extra legal pressure and potential violence that he brings to bear on every situation where he feels victimized now is very much front of mind in terms of us and the future of our democracy. I'd like to hear what you think about that, how you calibrate that, and and how you have dealt with what I know has been the anxiety around the threat level for you and your family.
So I know that he's already asked a series of the Republicans that showed up to court with him to pass a law whereby he cannot be held legally accountable for any crime. I've never heard of anything like this. He has his own set of constitutional rights that none of us are afforded the same. This is going to be a whole new law class for all these poor law students right now. They're going to have to take another course. Maybe Don, you end up teaching it at Harvard or something. Will he look to create violence? Sure. Will it happen? I don't think so. I don't believe that the American people are as invested in him as he believes. We've already seen what happened with the Oath Keepers, with the Stewart Rhodes, 18 years. Nobody wants to spend 18. I spent 13 months at Otisville, a satellite camp, but 51 days in solitary confinement. I assure you, nobody wants that for themselves. So no one's going to go out there, and do something stupid, especially, let's say, here in New York. We have the greatest law enforcement in New York. Our men and women in blue, the best. But they're also great in all the other cities and all the other states in our country. Then we have the National Guard. We have the military. No one is going to allow him to create the havoc that he wants everybody to believe that he has the ability to create.
We want to bring in the former acting U.S. Solicitor General of the United States, Neal Katyal, part of our special coverage, here with Rachel, Nicole, Chris, and Andrew. Neal, May 30th, 2024, Donald J. Trump convicted on 34 felony counts. What does this verdict mean?
So, Ari, I think about it in 3 words: 34 for 45. 34 counts convicted for the 45th former president of the United States. It's never happened before in our history. And these are felony counts. These aren't slaps on the wrist. They're not misdemeanors. These are not minor things. As the prosecutor Steinglass said to the jury in his closing, Donald Trump may have been elected president because of these crimes, because of his hiding of these campaign contributions. And, Rachel has talked eloquently about the political implications. I don't understand that. I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you what this means about the rule of law. I mean, my parents came here to this country precisely because of jury verdicts like this, because of the idea that no one is above the law, that a jury of one's peers can hold someone to account no matter who you are. And this jury has now decided that. And Ari, I think the most important point is they decided that and Trump was guilty against the most difficult standard for the prosecution to show in all of American law. They had to show it beyond a reasonable doubt. They had to win all 12 jurors. One juror saying Trump didn't do it was enough for him not to be convicted. I know how hard that is. I did that in the George Floyd murder with my team. That's a scary standard, to do. But here it was met as it was in the Floyd case. And, that's such a tough standard, Ari. It's like, it's kind of like failing kindergarten. If you're a jury facing a jury trial, you got to kind of try to fail a jury trial if you're a criminal defendant. You got everything going for you. And yet Trump managed to do that. Yeah. And I think the last thing I'd just say is Chris Hayes' point about the faith in the system is right. I mean, that, I think this shows that the system works, but I suspect Trump's next move will be, as it always is, to denigrate the system, to attack the institutions, to attack the prosecution, to attack the jury system. And so don't pop our champagne corks yet, because Trump's going to run against this system. Mm-hmm. And our job as lawyers is to make sure that people understand how that system works and how justice was done today.
Neal Katyal weighing in here for the first time, and we appreciate you making time to do that. Thank you. We're back with our full panel. Neal mentioned what Chris had said, and as well, Nicole, you think about we're moments away from Alvin Bragg, the DA who brought this case. It was going to be controversial, probably either way. Mm-hmm. I would note, if his name is not super familiar, if you're watching and can't even conjure exactly what he looks like, that is because he has followed the Jack Smith playbook and the Bob Mueller playbook before that. DA Bragg spoke once regarding this case. It was when they announced the prosecution, and it was very spare. So spare, I'll remind people, he was criticized at the time for not elaborating further about the theory, about the campaign aspects, things that we then later learned about in detail in court, where he let his team, the assistant DAs, do the talking. And so we're scheduled to hear from him moments away. They released one tweet, which you read earlier, where they said guilty on all counts. Very businesslike. But this will be the first time we hear from this DA who's let the evidence and his team do the talking.
I mean, he's been underestimated. You've interviewed him. You've interviewed him as well. And to talk to him, he wants to talk to you about other things. He's not, Donald Trump relies on and projects onto everyone else what is inside of him. And what's inside of him is a possessed and obsessed partisan actor. Alvin Bragg just doesn't fit the mold. I mean, he did this because the facts and the law supported this. Again, not in a timeline that a lot of his supporters and detractors would have liked. I think some people would have liked to have seen the case that Pomerantz had investigated go to trial much sooner than Alvin Bragg brought it. But he was convinced. I think there was some reverse engineering, and I say that not as a lawyer, of the Michael Cohen account. There seemed to be meticulous corroboration if you read every transcript and if you looked at every witness. And I think that it's a little more clear, and we'll hear from him himself, that maybe that was what he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, the Alvin Bragg achievement here, Andrew, before we got the jury's verdict, you were saying if there is one guilty verdict among these 34 counts, that is a victory for the prosecution. That counts as a conviction, and that is what the prosecution is aiming for. When it came in as all 34, that's obviously something more than a victory for the prosecution. It's a vindication of their approach. And their approach here was methodical. Obviously, we saw what the defense's approach was, which was Michael Cohen is a bad man. We saw what the prosecution's handling was of that criticism, which was everything that Michael Cohen is going to tell you is as a narrator of the evidence, essentially. But we're also going to show you the evidence. They had smoking gun documentation of the crimes that they needed to prove.
So what people are going to hear from Alvin Bragg, and it's sort of good background from my friends in law enforcement who have known him for years as a federal prosecutor, as a state prosecutor. The word on Alvin Bragg is he is the real deal.
Yeah.
Not meaning that he's Torquemada and he's like, I'm going to go out hammer and tongs on everyone, meaning he is a professional who is principled. And that when he said the case wasn't ready, it was because the case wasn't ready. And when he decided to bring the case, it was because he decided the case was ready. In other words, it's like what you see is what you get. There's no backstory. It is like this was a guy who's known as the real deal. And then he handled himself that way. Without casting any aspersions on any other way anyone else acts, he did the sort of classic model of I'm going to speak in court. And this verdict is what he's speaking out through. And now is the time for him to say something about his team. And the one thing everyone saw that when you were in court was this was the A-team. Yeah. I mean, it was a stupendous presentation.
So can we newsify it a little bit? Do you expect him to take questions? Do you think he'll speak to sentencing on what they're requesting or make any news tonight like that?
I don't think he'll talk about sentencing. I think that they're going to think long and hard about what to do. I do expect that, I mean, not to tout myself on the back, but I do think the things that I said that are factors are going to be brought up to the court. It is, by the way, it's an E felony, so it is not the most serious felony under state law, but it is hard to think of an E felony that is more serious in terms of the underlying facts. And that is something that Judge Merchan is so experienced, has been a judge for so long, that cannot escape him.
Can I jump in here just for a second? For anybody who might just be joining us, you just skipped over sort of an important point that we discussed there earlier, and I want to make sure we resurface that. The next thing that's going to happen here in court is that there's going to be, both sides are going to submit their advice to the judge, essentially their arguments to the judge as to what the sentencing should be. The sentencing is scheduled for July 11th at 10 a.m. You mentioned earlier, Andrew, that one of the things Judge Merchan might reasonably consider when he is making a decision on sentence is the fact that Trump multiply violated the gag order in this case. Right. And that that is allowed to influence the judge's perception in terms of what kind of sentence is warranted here. My question is the gag order still in effect? Does the gag order stay in effect until sentencing, or is it now over because the trial itself is over?
So that's interesting because, one of the things that it focuses on is witnesses and jurors.
And jurors, right.
So I think with respect to jurors, it'll be interesting to see whether the judge says something and clarifies, because that is going to be needed going forward.
Protecting the jurors.
Absolutely. And also, just to be fair, with witnesses, it is, as the judge said, he is concerned not just about the individual person right in front of him, but about the next person. And so if you are concerned about witnesses writ large and jurors writ large, you want to make sure that they are protected and they don't feel secure. I mean, it is, by the way, it is still surreal that we are having this question about somebody who is president of the United States.
Yeah.
This is the kind of conversation.
Mob talk.
Exactly.
Having done organized crime cases, you do not, this is beyond mob talk.
Yeah. They're rational actors, right?
Exactly. This is something you worry about to a certain extent. That is why there's the Witness Protection Program. You would not worry about it at this point,
and but you are. More than having done, you were Eastern District. You guys do more mafia cases than most any district in the country.
True.
So as we await here, we're 90 seconds out from when DA Bragg may speak, or maybe a little delayed. Andrew was talking to Rachel about what could happen in this July sentencing hearing, and you mentioned witnesses. We also have fresh reporting out of the courtroom today. The last thing that happened after the jury was polled and after the judge made his closing remarks, and that's really completing it, was the defense, having seen their defendant convicted on all 34 counts, made one final push requesting an acquittal motion, and they based that on attacking Michael Cohen, who proved to be a good enough witness. Not a perfect witness, but clearly good enough. I mentioned we're going to hear from DA Bragg. We're also scheduled here. It's news, but will be interesting to hear from Michael Cohen tonight on MSNBC, the first place I believe he'll be speaking since the verdict. But Andrew, can you speak on that and how they are still going to launch this appeal strategy going at Cohen, while the sentencing could be harsher if they view his other attacks on witnesses as part of aggravating factors?
Well, it'll be interesting. I think the timing of the sentencing and the appeal is going to be very much what I would say, Nicole, as I say, in your lane. It'll be in the politics lane in terms of what they think may happen on appeal and whether they think that is something that will benefit them. If they think that it'll be useful to have an appellate brief in before the election so that they can get some lackeys to say, oh, yes, this is there's tons of legal error here, they will do that. But for the moment, there will be a sentencing. There is no question that the judge is going to, no matter what sentence it is. I have to say this is in front of a judge, and I felt this way when I went to a sentencing that Amy Berman Jackson, who had the Manafort case and the Rick Gates case, where I had my own view as to what I thought should happen. And sometimes you're in front of a judge that you respect so much and think is so thoughtful that you really think whatever he does is actually going to be fair. Yeah. It may not be exactly what you would do, but this is one where we have seen a judge who has just done an incredible job getting the case to trial. Not being able to put this person, having to put the person in jail, trying to make sure that there was a fair process.
Joining us now is Donald Trump's niece, Mary Trump. She's the author of a book about her uncle called Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. She's also the host of The Nerd Avengers on MaryTrumpMedia.com. And I should tell you, this is Mary's first interview since this verdict today. Mary Trump, it's nice to see you. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. We appreciate having you here.
Oh, it's great to be here, Rachel.
What was your reaction when you first heard the news?
I was, as you can imagine, relieved, happy, and it took a minute to sink in. But it also, as the counts went 1 through 34, guilty, 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 et cetera, the weight of this moment really sunk in. It really hit me. This has so much meaning for all of us. I'm incredibly proud of my city and my state. I am really just relieved on behalf of the American people. This is such a long time coming. And I know that he's been found guilty of the charges that were presented to the jury, but in some ways it feels like it's standing in for all of the other crimes this man has gotten away with his entire life. So there was something just incredibly gratifying and moving about it. And I've heard people say that we can celebrate the jury system, we can celebrate the jurors and the way this trial was handled, but it's a dark day in America that somebody in Donald's position has been found guilty of these crimes. And I would respectfully disagree. I think it's a great day for America. I think it shows us that in some instances, when it really matters, the system is holding, and that even somebody like him, who has with impunity gotten away with some of the most egregious crimes over the course of decades, has finally, at long last, been held accountable.
What impact do you think this will have on him personally? You understand his sort of demeanor and his history in a way that the rest of us don't. The rest of us have only ever seen the public side of him. How do you think this will change him or land with him? How do you think he'll respond?
You know, it's interesting. I heard Michael Cohen say earlier that Donald is somebody who will never take responsibility and will always deflect and cast blame to anybody else. And, you know, this is something he learned at the knees of my grandfather, who taught Donald the same thing. You just never take responsibility for anything. We saw that during his disastrous 4 years during his administration. He never takes responsibility for anything. And because of that, along with the fact that, again, he has operated with impunity for so long, I think it's going to take a while for this to sink in. And I think we're going to see a very similar dynamic to what happened after the 2020 election. There was a moment in private when he understood that he had lost. He will understand that he has indeed been found guilty on 34 criminal counts. I'm sorry, I shouldn't smile, but it makes me smile to say that out loud. But the humiliation of that is going to hit him so deeply, as it did 4 years ago, that he, as I believe you said earlier, will have to create his alternate reality. And unfortunately, we see that this is not something that just impacts him. This is something that has drawn in millions, tens of millions of people, and it has left all of us at risk. So I think we need to expect the same thing here. He will do everything in his power to spin this so that it is, well, he'll try to make it an advantage to him. And we need to guard against that. And he will also stop at nothing to change the subject. So I do not agree that we don't have to worry about violence here. We need to worry about his willingness and eagerness, actually, to use his power and his platform to get other people to carry out his threats. We saw this yesterday when Officer Fanone's mother was swatted shortly after he showed up to speak his mind outside of the courthouse yesterday. So there's a lot going on, but we can never, ever underestimate or overestimate, the extent to which Donald will use any means at his disposal to deflect and get his way.
Mary, it's Alex Wagner. Thanks for joining us tonight. We know from reports and from witnessing ourselves that your uncle was resting his retinas, to be generous, at many points during this trial. When the verdict was read, however, he was very much eyes wide open. He was paying attention and he was largely expressionless. Maybe that's because there weren't cameras in the courtroom, or maybe just because he was intently focused. Do you think he is afraid right now? There is the very real possibility that he will serve prison time. It may not be this year. We don't know when it will be. But given what Michael Cohen served for the same crime, I do wonder if you think he quietly is very scared.
Well, he certainly should be. And whether he expresses that consciously or not, I don't know. But certainly on a deep level, he is afraid because, Alex, this is a moment he has been dreading his entire life. Donald has always known that he is nothing of what he's claimed to be. He is not a tough guy. He is not an outlaw. He is somebody who is terrified of humiliation. He's somebody who understands that in the language of my family, being a loser is absolutely the worst thing you can be. He cannot pretend otherwise. And I think he also must sense that this is a very big domino that's fallen here. And we may see, or hopefully we will see, a very swift unraveling of his support. I think we're going to see a lot of trial balloons in the next few days from Republicans who may not want to be associated with somebody who is a convicted felon running for the presidency. But there are all sorts of reasons for Donald to be afraid right now. And I think chief among them, even though this is not something that can happen in reality, he understands that in my family, if you're a loser, that's something that's going to get you killed. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Mary, it's Lawrence O'Donnell, and I wanted to follow up on that loser point because I watched your uncle in the courtroom for so many days, and with Michael Cohen on the stand and others, and your uncle was sitting there as a salesman that he always is. He's always been trying to sell something. He was trying to sell those 12 people on a story he wasn't willing to say himself. He wasn't willing to get on the witness stand and testify about. Michael Cohen did testify. And now, when Donald Trump heard that word guilty 34 times, he discovered that it didn't work, that he spent all these weeks in this room trying to sell those people, and it didn't work. They unanimously, they did not buy it. And at the same time, when he heard those 34 guilties, he had to realize they believed Stormy Daniels. They believed everything she said, every one of those details about inside the hotel room. They believed Michael Cohen. They did not believe my side of the story that I was trying to sell them. And so he comes out the loser in that, charm and selling contest with that jury. And I'm just wondering what that does to him, because that goes to the very core of what he thinks his talent is, which is convincing people of things.
Lawrence, it's such an excellent point. We see, and he has learned what happens in a situation in which he is not fully in control, or he doesn't have other people controlling the environment to his benefit. And we saw this, I think, in part by his complete lack of understanding that he even needed to try. I think if you want the jury on your side, you're not going to fall asleep during people's testimony. You're not going to attack them ever in any way whatsoever. You're going to be attentive. You're not going to complain about the conditions inside of the courtroom, because he's not the only person who needed to be there, but he's the only person who was there because he didn't have a choice, because he's the one who committed these crimes, we can now say. Everybody else had to be there also because of what he had done. So he just didn't understand what it means to cater to people in an environment he doesn't control. And I think it was his lack of control that made it impossible for him to rise to the occasion. And of course, we know he was never going to testify. So he really needed to just sort of behave like a respectful, decent human being who is taking this seriously and not just sort of skating on his hope that the jury was going to be so intimidated by him and his power and his position. And it failed miserably. And I think he's going to understand that. He will blame his lawyers. He will blame the judge. He will blame everybody on this TV program right now. He'll blame everybody. He won't take responsibility, but he will understand the limits to his own personal power. And I think that's going to freak him out.
Hey, Mary, it's Joy. Thank you for being here tonight. If he's had a reckoning emotionally, even privately, after this conviction, he will have another on July 11th when he is sentenced. And then 4 days later, he will accept the nomination of the Republican Party. prepare us for what the propaganda field will look like. How will he explain this and call upon his party to explain this to that crowd at the Republican National Convention? What should we expect to hear as an excuse for what happened, what had just happened at that point 4 days earlier?
Joy, it's a great question, and it's sort of related to what we were just talking about a minute ago. He is going to feel completely unbound now by any sense of having to operate within somebody else's system, to the extent that he even bothered. But once we get to sentencing, I think he's also going to realize that the other thing he wasn't able to control and wasn't able to behave in the context of was the idea that he might be facing prison. And the irony for him, of course, is that if he had behaved like a normal human being throughout this trial, I think the risk of prison would have been fairly low. But because of his egregious behavior, because he broke that gag order 11 times, because the judge had to make that ruling, and because the judge deferred any significant punishment, I think the chances that he gets a prison term have increased exponentially. So he's going to have to deal with that as well. So whatever happens, though, the convention is going to make 2016 look like child's play. And Joy, as I think you said earlier, the hideous chance of lock her up, the utter lawlessness and vindictiveness that was directed at the Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, was like nothing we had ever seen before in this country. It's going to be so much worse, so much darker, and especially given the fact that we've already seen what he's been doing. He and his minions and his enablers in the Republican Party have been telling us the last few months exactly what they plan to do with this country if we are reckless enough to give them power again.
Mary Trump, hi, it's Ari Melber. We try not to speculate too much, but you can. Do you have the view that Donald Trump, based on what you know, would be likely to fire his lawyer or lawyers in this case soon? We've seen some already depart, like Joe Tacopina, who used to be on the New York case. And if he gets legal counsel to show contrition, to authorize his lawyers to express that at sentencing, is there any way that you think he could play that out, pretend to feel that way for a day?
You know, Ari, I think he's constitutionally incapable of such a thing, even if it redounds to his benefit. And one of the biggest clues to that end is the way his lawyers behaved in the courtroom, clearly at his direction, even though it went against what they should have been doing to protect their client. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and even I was able to identify serious missteps his lawyers made because Donald was directing them to say certain things or behave in certain ways. And that's because he cannot face the truth about who he is or why he was there or what he's facing. So I don't think there will be any mitigating. There will certainly be no pretense, even pretense at contrition. And he's just going to put himself in even more jeopardy. Whether or not he retains his counsel, I don't know. If I were them, I wouldn't want to continue working for him. But I can't imagine they're having a very good night. Let's put it that way.
Mary Trump, we're really glad that you were able to be here with us tonight. It's a privilege to have you here on such an important moment in history. Thanks.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.